Howdy, folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixskin, your channel for tales of the Wild West. If you're like me, somewhere between 30 and 75 and maybe even a bit past that, you appreciate a good story about grit, survival, and maybe even a little bit of romance on the open range. Today, we're diving into a story that's got all that and more. So, before we get started, if you like what you hear, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin so you don't miss any of our upcoming adventures. Let's get to it. Our story opens with a gunshot, and that gunshot changes everything. Across the dusty plains of Arizona Territory, it marked the end for Violet Parker's father, leaving her, a mere 19 years old, with the staggering responsibility of 3 young brothers and a struggling homestead. It's 1878, a time when life was tough, and Arizona was even tougher. Survival meant rising before the sun peeked over the horizon and working until your hands bled. Days were filled with the harsh realities of farm life, repairs, and the ever-present worry of where the next meal was coming from. As for Violet, she tried to be strong, putting on a brave face for her brothers, although she still felt the weight of grief and responsibility pressing down. "Violet, I'm hungry." That was 7-year-old Tommy, tugging on her flour-dusted apron as she kneaded dough in their small cabin kitchen. "Supper's coming, little man," she replied, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "Why don't you check if Levy and Samuel finished their chores?" Tommy scurried away, his bare feet pattering against the wooden floor. It had been 3 months since P had been shot and killed by cattle rustlers, and Violet still wasn't used to being the one everyone depended on. Their mother had died years ago from fever, leaving Pa to raise them all. Now, it was just her. The Parker homestead sat 10 miles outside of Willow Creek, a small but growing town where Violet sold eggs and vegetables when their garden produced enough. It was a hard life, but she was determined to keep her family together. Isn't that just like the West? So, if you're enjoying this story, take a moment to give Saddle and Sixskin a like or subscribe. The cabin needed repairs, the well was starting to run dry, and winter would be coming in a few months. She had no idea how they would survive. A knock at the door startled her. Visitors were rare this far out. "Madam," a deep voice called. "Anyone home?" Violet grabbed the shotgun from beside the door, holding it ready as she cracked it open. A tall man stood on her porch, cowboy hat in hand, dust covering his clothes from the trail. His face was weathered from the sun, but his eyes were kind beneath a shock of sandy hair. "State your business," she said firmly, though her heart raced. The man raised his hand slightly. "Name's Gideon Hayes. I'm looking for work in these parts. Town folks said the Parker place might need some help." "We can't pay," Violet said flatly. "Not much, anyway." "I'm not asking for much," Gideon replied, "just meals and a place to sleep in your barn. I'm handy with tools, good with cattle, and I don't cause trouble." Behind her, Tommy appeared, staring wide-eyed at the stranger. 2 more boys peeked around the corner, 10-year-old Levy and 12-year-old Samuel. "You got quite a crew there," Gideon observed with a gentle smile. Violet's grip tightened on the shotgun. "My brothers." Gideon nodded, his eyes taking in the sagging porch, the leaky roof, the broken fence posts. "Looks like you've got your hands full. What if I help? Just until you get things squared away." For a moment, Violet hesitated. Trusting strangers was dangerous, especially with 3 young boys to protect, but winter was coming, and she was drowning in responsibilities. "Okay," she finally said, lowering the gun slightly, "but you sleep in the barn, and I'll be keeping this close." Gideon nodded. "Yes, ma'am. You won't regret it." Little did Violet know that those simple words, "What if I help?" and her reluctant, "Okay," would change everything. Now, before this story gets any wilder, take a chance and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin and you might like it. Gideon proved his worth immediately. By sunset, he had repaired the broken porch step, fixed a leak in the roof, and rounded up 2 stray cattle that had wandered through the broken fence line. The boys watched him with fascination, especially Samuel, who followed him around, asking endless questions. "Where'd you learn to fix things like that?" Samuel asked as Gideon mended a broken wagon wheel. "My pa taught me," Gideon replied. "He was a blacksmith back in Texas." "Our pa's dead," Samuel said bluntly. "Got shot by bad men." Gideon's hands paused on the wheel. "I'm sorry to hear that, son." "Samuel," Violet called sharply from the doorway, "come help with supper." As Samuel ran to the house, Gideon caught Violet's weary gaze. She was protective, fierce, even standing tall despite the weight she carried. Something about her strength touched him in a way he hadn't expected. That night, Violet served a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of their salted pork. She invited Gideon to eat with them, though she said little during the meal. The boys, however, chattered excitedly, telling stories about school and asking Gideon about his travels. "You've been to California?" Levi asked, eyes wide with wonder. "Sure have," Gideon nodded. "Seen the ocean, too. Water as far as you can see, like the sky touching the earth." "I want to see the ocean someday," Tommy declared. "You will," Violet said softly, the first gentle words Gideon had heard from her. "Once you're bigger." After supper, Gideon returned to the barn as promised. He spread his bedroll in the hayloft and stared up at the gaps in the roof where stars peeked through. The Parker family had worked their way under his skin in just one day, especially Violet with her guarded eyes and the way she mothered her brothers with fierce devotion. Gideon had been drifting for 2 years since the war with the Apaches ended. He'd fought, seen things no man should see, and afterward couldn't settle in one place, but something about this struggling family made him want to stay, at least for a while. Morning came early on the homestead. Violet was already at the stove when Gideon entered the kitchen, hat in hand. "Morning," he said. "Mind if I get some water from the well?" "Help yourself," she replied without looking up. Buckets by the door. As the days passed, a routine developed. Gideon worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing the cabin, tending the livestock, and clearing new ground for planting. The boys slowly warmed to him, especially Tommy, who took to following Gideon like a shadow. One afternoon, as Gideon repaired the chicken coop, Tommy sat nearby, whittling a stick with the small knife Gideon had given him. "Mr. Gideon, are you going to marry my sister?" Tommy asked suddenly. "Well, what do you think?" Before we go any further, hit that like button and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. Gideon nearly hammered his thumb. "What makes you ask that?" Tommy shrugged. "Mrs. Wilson from church says Violet needs a husband, says it ain't proper for a girl to raise boys alone." Gideon set his hammer down. "Your sister's doing just fine raising you boys. She's the strongest woman I've ever met, but she cries sometimes," Tommy said quietly, "at night when she thinks we're sleeping." The words hit Gideon like a physical blow. The thought of Violet crying alone twisted something inside him. "Well," Gideon said carefully, "everyone needs to let their feelings out sometimes, even strong people." That evening, Gideon watched Violet more closely. She moved efficiently around the kitchen, serving food, mending clothes, helping the boys with their schoolwork. But beneath her capable exterior, he caught glimpses of exhaustion in the shadows under her eyes and the slight droop of her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. After the boys were in bed, Gideon found Violet sitting alone on the porch steps, staring at the stars. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She shrugged, which he took as permission. He sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "You've done wonders with this place," Violet said after a moment. "The boys adore you." "They're good kids," Gideon replied. "You've raised them well." Violet laughed, a soft, bitter sound. "I've been raising them for 3 months, Pa did the real work." "Don't sell yourself short," Gideon said. "Takes real grit to do what you're doing." They sat in silence for a moment, the night air cooling around them. "Why'd you really come here, Gideon?" Violet finally asked. "A man like you could find paying work anywhere." Gideon considered his answer carefully. "Truth is, I've been drifting a long while. After the Apache Wars ended, I couldn't seem to find my place. Worked ranches, drove cattle, did some scouting. Nothing felt right. And fixing our broken-down homestead feels right." Her tone was skeptical. "More right than anything has in a long time," he admitted. Their eyes met in the darkness, and something passed between them. A moment of understanding that neither was ready to acknowledge. "I should turn in," Violet said, standing abruptly. "Dawn comes early, Violet," Gideon said as she reached the door. "You don't have to carry everything alone." She paused, her hand on the door frame. "Yes, I do. They're my responsibility. Doesn't mean you can't accept help when it's offered." Violet didn't respond, just slipped inside the cabin, leaving Gideon alone with the night sounds and his troubled thoughts. The next day brought unexpected visitors. Violet was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. Her heart quickened as she recognized Sheriff Miller from town, accompanied by a well-dressed man she didn't know. "Afternoon, Miss Parker," the sheriff called, tipping his hat. "Hope we're not intruding." "Not at all, Sheriff," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "What brings you out this way?" "This is Mr. Hollister from the bank in Phoenix," the sheriff explained. "He's here about your father's loan." Violet's stomach dropped. P had taken a loan to buy cattle and repair equipment after a particularly harsh winter 2 years ago. With his death, she'd been struggling to make the payments. "Miss Parker," Mr. Hollister began, his tone businesslike, "I'm afraid you're 3 months behind on payments. The bank is considering foreclosure." "Foreclosure?" Violet repeated, her voice thin. "But this is our home. My brothers and I have nowhere else to go." "I understand your situation is difficult," Hollister said, not unkindly, "but business is business. You have 30 days to bring the account current, or we'll have no choice but to reclaim the property." Gideon appeared from the barn, his presence tall and steady beside Violet. "How much is needed to bring the account current?" he asked. Hollister named a sum that made Violet's knees weak. It was more than she could hope to earn in a year, let alone a month. "We got through half the story. So, if you're enjoying this story, take a moment to give Saddle and Sixskin a like or subscribe." After the men left, Violet sank onto the porch steps, her face in her hands. "I've failed them," she whispered. "Pod would be so disappointed." Gideon sat beside her. "You haven't failed anyone. We'll figure something out." "We?" She looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "This isn't your problem, Gideon." "I made it my problem when I decided to stay," he said firmly. "Besides, I've got some savings, not enough to cover it all, but it's a start." Violet shook her head. "I can't take your money." "It's not taking if I'm offering," Gideon countered, "and it's not charity. It's an investment in this place and those boys." He paused. "In you." Their eyes met, and Violet felt something shift between them, a barrier crumbling that she'd carefully maintained. "Why do you care so much?" she asked softly. Gideon looked away toward the distant mountains. "Maybe I'm tired of drifting, maybe I see something worth staying for." Before Violet could respond, Tommy came running from the house, excitement on his face. "Violet, Samuel caught a fish in the creek, a big one." The moment broke, but something had changed. As Violet followed Tommy to see Samuel's prize catch, she found herself glancing back at Gideon, seeing him in a new light. That night, after the boys were asleep, Violet sat at the kitchen table, papers spread before her. She was trying to make sense of their finances to find some solution to their impending crisis. Gideon joined her, bringing a mug of coffee. "We could sell some livestock," Violet suggested weakly. "Not enough to make a difference," Gideon replied. But I've been thinking, the cattle drive to Sedona leaves next week, and they're looking for experienced hands. The pay is good. You'd leave? Violet asked, surprised by the disappointment that flooded her. Just for a few weeks, Gideon assured her. The money would help, and I know a few merchants in Sedona who might pay top dollar for some of your preserved goods. Violet glanced at the shelves lined with jars of peaches, pickles, and jams she'd put up over the summer. You think people would buy those? Your preserves are the best I've tasted, Gideon said with a smile. And Sedona is full of mining folks with money to spend and a taste for home comforts. For the first time in months, Violet felt a flicker of hope. It might work, but how will I manage everything while you're gone? Samuel's old enough to help with the heavier chores, Gideon said, and I'll speak to Jake Wilson about checking in on you. His place is just over the ridge. Violet nodded slowly. Okay, but you have to promise to come back. The words slipped out before she could stop them, revealing more of her feelings than she'd intended. Gideon's eyes softened. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. The days before Gideon's departure passed quickly. He worked harder than ever, ensuring everything was in good repair. He taught Samuel how to manage the livestock and showed Levy how to check the fence lines. Even little Tommy was given responsibilities gathering eggs and feeding the chickens. The evening before he was to leave, Violet prepared a special supper with their best provisions. The boys were unusually quiet, aware that their friend would be gone for several weeks. Will you bring us something from Sedona? Tommy asked as they ate. Tommy, Violet admonished. Mr. Hayes isn't obligated to bring gifts. It's all right, Gideon smiled. I'll bring something for each of you, something special. After the boys were in bed, Violet and Gideon sat on the porch, the night air cool around them. Stars blanketed the sky, brilliant in the clear desert night. Thank you, Violet said softly. For everything. No need for thanks, Gideon replied. This place, you, and the boys, it means something to me. Violet studied his profile in the moonlight. You never told me what brought you to our door that day. What made you stop here of all places? Gideon was quiet for a moment. Truth is, I was heading nowhere in particular, been that way since the war. But as I was passing through town, I heard talk about the Parker place, about a young woman trying to raise her brothers alone after their father was killed. He paused. Something told me to come here, like I was meant to. Do you believe in fate, Gideon? Violet asked. Never used to, he admitted, but these past weeks have made me wonder. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Violet felt a connection that frightened and thrilled her. Gideon leaned closer, his hand gently covering hers on the wooden step between them. Violet, he said, his voice low. I want you to know. The door creaked behind them, and they quickly moved apart as Samuel appeared, rubbing his eyes. Violet, I had a bad dream, he mumbled. I'll be right there, she said, rising. She glanced apologetically at Gideon. Good night, and safe travels tomorrow. Gideon nodded, the moment broken but not forgotten. Good night, Violet. Now that Gideon is off in the cattle drive, take a chance and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. Morning came too soon. Gideon's horse was packed, and the boys gathered to say goodbye. Tommy clung to Gideon's leg while Levy and Samuel tried to maintain more dignified farewells. Mind your sister, Gideon told them. And remember what I taught you. Finally, he turned to Violet. She stood straight, trying to hide the worry in her eyes. 3 weeks, he said. I'll be back before you know it. Violet nodded, not trusting her voice. Impulsively, she stepped forward and pressed something into his hand, a small embroidered handkerchief with his initials. For luck, she said softly. Gideon's fingers closed around the token, his eyes never leaving hers. I'll treasure it. Then he was gone, riding away toward the cattle drive meeting point, his figure growing smaller on the horizon. Violet watched until he disappeared, a strange emptiness settling in her chest. The days without Gideon stretched long. Violet threw herself into work, preserving the last of the garden harvest and preparing for winter. The boys did their best to help, though Samuel struggled with some of the heavier tasks Gideon had made look easy. A week after Gideon's departure, trouble arrived. Violet was hanging laundry when she spotted 3 riders approaching. Her hand instinctively moved to the pocket of her apron where she kept a small revolver. As they drew closer, Violet recognized one of the men, Cal Riggs, a local troublemaker who'd worked briefly for her father before being dismissed for stealing. "Well, look here, boys," Cal called as they reined in. "The Parker girl playing house." "State your business or move on, Mr. Riggs," Violet said firmly, though her heart raced. Cal dismounted, his movement lazy and confident. "Heard your hired man left you high and dry, thought you might need some help around here." "We're managing fine," Violet replied, "and he'll be back soon." Cal laughed, a harsh sound. "That's not what I heard. Word is Hayes joined up with the cattle drive headed all the way to California. Don't expect him back, sweetheart." Violet kept her expression neutral, though the words stung. "I'll ask you again to state your business or leave my property." Cal stepped closer, his smile unpleasant. "Maybe I'm interested in buying this place. Banks looking to foreclose, ain't they? I could make you an offer, save you the embarrassment." "Not selling," Violet said flatly. "Might not have a choice," Cal replied. His eyes roamed over the homestead, calculating. "Shame to see a pretty little thing like you struggle. A man like me could take good care of you." Before Violet could respond, Samuel appeared from the barn, a pitchfork in his hands. "My sister asked you to leave," he said, his young voice cracking with emotion. Cal laughed. "Look at the little man, got some fight in you, boy." "Leave my brother out of this," Violet warned, stepping between them. "Or what?" Cal challenged, reaching for her arm. The sound of a rifle being cocked froze everyone. Jake Wilson stood at the edge of the yard, his weapon trained on Cal. "Miss Parker asked you to leave," Jake said calmly. "I suggest you do so." Cal's eyes narrowed, but he was outnumbered. "This ain't over," he muttered, mounting his horse. "Place will be mine soon enough." After they rode away, Violet thanked Jake with shaking hands. "Promised Gideon I'd keep an eye out," Jake said simply. "Man made me swear it before he left." "Did he?" Violet hesitated. "Did he say anything about going to California?" Jake shook his head. "Said he'd be back in 3 weeks. Gideon Hayes ain't the type to break his word, Miss Parker." Relief flooded Violet, though she tried not to show it. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson." That night, as she tucked the boys into bed, Tommy asked the question that had been weighing on all their minds. "Is Mr. Gideon really coming back, Violet?" Violet smoothed his hair. "Yes, Tommy, he promised." "Cal Riggs is a liar," Samuel declared from his bed. "And a thief," Pod said. "That's enough, Samuel," Violet cautioned. "Mr. Riggs is not our concern." But later, alone in her room, Violet couldn't help but worry. What if Gideon had decided to keep moving? What if the pull of the road was stronger than whatever he felt for them? For her. 2 more weeks passed, marked by hard work and growing anxiety. The bank deadline loomed, and there was still no word from Gideon. Violet began to fear that Cal Riggs had been right. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Saddle and Sixkin before this story is over. Then one crisp autumn morning, Levy came running from the fields. Riders coming, lots of them. Violet grabbed her shotgun and hurried outside. The boys clustered behind her. A group of horsemen approached, driving a small herd of cattle before them. At their head rode a familiar figure. "Gideon," Violet whispered, her heart leaping. As they drew closer, she could see his smile bright beneath the trail dust. The boys whooped and ran to meet him, Tommy reaching him first and being swung up onto the saddle. "What's all this?" Violet asked as Gideon reined in before her, gesturing to the cattle. "Your new breeding stock," Gideon announced proudly. 10 of the finest heifers from the Hayes family ranch in Texas. "I don't understand," Violet said, confused. Gideon dismounted, handing Tommy to Samuel. "May I speak with you privately?" They walked a short distance from the others toward the old oak tree that shaded the yard. "The cattle drive went well," Gideon explained. "Better than expected, but it wasn't enough to cover your loan." He paused. "So, I rode to Texas to my family's ranch." "Texas?" Violet was stunned. "That's hundreds of miles." "I had to see my father," Gideon continued. "To ask for his help, and to get his blessing." "Blessing for what?" Violet asked, her pulse quickening. Gideon took her hands in his. "Violet Parker, I've been drifting most of my life. I never found a place that felt like home until I came here, until I met you and those boys." Violet could barely breathe. Gideon continued, "My father agreed to help. The cattle are part of it. They're worth more than enough to save the homestead, but he had one condition." Gideon smiled. "That I stop drifting and put down roots." "What are you saying, Gideon?" Violet whispered. "I'm saying I love you, Violet. You and the boys have become my family. I'm asking if you'll let me stay, not as a hired hand, but as a husband, a father to those boys." Tears filled Violet's eyes. "You came back." "I promised I would," Gideon said simply. "And I keep my promises." "Yes," Violet said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Gideon pulled her close, his kiss gentle yet filled with promise. When they broke apart, Violet laughed through her tears. "The boys will be overjoyed," she said, "especially Tommy. He's been asking if you would marry me since your second day here." Gideon chuckled. "Smart boy, saw what I was feeling before I fully knew it myself." They returned to the waiting group, hands entwined. The boys noticed immediately, their eyes wide with questions. "Boys," Violet said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mr. Hayes has asked me to marry him, and I've said yes." Tommy whooped with joy while Levi and Samuel exchanged grins. The men who'd accompanied Gideon offered congratulations. "There's more," Gideon added. "The cattle are part of our fresh start, and I've brought something for each of you." From his saddlebags, he produced gifts. A small wooden horse he'd carved for Tommy, a book on astronomy for Levi, and a real hunting knife for Samuel. For Violet, he had something special. A gold locket containing a small photograph of her parents on their wedding day. "How did you get this?" she asked, tears threatening again. "Your father's friend in town had it," Gideon explained. "I wanted you to have something of them for our wedding day." That evening, the homestead was filled with more joy than it had seen in months. Gideon's friends stayed for supper, bringing supplies they'd packed in, coffee, sugar, flour, and even some store-bought candy for the boys. Hope this brings some inspiration to you, so feel free to subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin and share it with your family. As the visitors settled in the barn for the night, Violet and Gideon once again found themselves alone on the porch, the stars bright above them. "I was so afraid you wouldn't come back," Violet admitted. "Cal Riggs came by, said you'd gone to California." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Riggs was here? Did he threaten you?" "Jake Wilson sent him away," Violet assured him, "but he made an offer on the homestead, said the bank would foreclose anyway." "Well, he's in for a disappointment," Gideon said firmly. "Tomorrow, we'll ride to town, pay off that loan, and start planning our future." Violet leaned against his shoulder, feeling truly safe for the first time since her father died. "Our future," she repeated, savoring the words. The next day brought the official beginning of their new life. Gideon and Violet rode to town where they paid the bank loan in full and filed their intention to marry. The town's reaction was mixed. Some were genuinely happy for them, while others whispered about the speed of the courtship. "Don't let them bother you," Gideon said as they left the general store where the proprietor's wife had been particularly nosy. "People will always talk." "I don't care what they think," Violet replied, surprising herself with the truth of the statement. "All that matters is us and the boys." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the town church. Violet wore her mother's dress, carefully altered, and the boys stood proudly beside them. After the ceremony, they hosted a small celebration at the homestead, now officially the Hayes Ranch. As the guests departed and the boys played in the yard, Gideon led Violet to the oak tree where he'd proposed. "I have one more surprise," he said, producing a folded paper from his pocket. "The deed to the adjacent property. It's ours now, too." Violet's eyes widened. "But how?" "That must have cost. My father was more generous than I expected," Gideon explained. "He's been wanting me to settle down for years, said it was worth the investment to finally have me in one place." "When will I meet him?" Violet asked. "He's coming for Christmas along with my sister and her family," Gideon replied. "They're eager to meet the woman who finally tamed the drifter." Violet laughed. "I didn't tame you, I just gave you a reason to stay." Gideon pulled her close. "The best reason in the world." The seasons changed, and the Hayes Ranch flourished under their combined care. Gideon proved to be a natural father to the boys, firm but kind, teaching them the skills they would need as men. Violet watched her brothers blossom under his guidance, growing stronger and more confident each day. Winter brought Gideon's family as promised. His father, Gregory Hayes, was a robust man with the same kind eyes as his son. His sister Eleanor, her husband, and their 2 daughters completed the group. The small cabin was bursting with people, laughter, and love during their visit. "You've done well, son," Gregory told Gideon on Christmas Eve as they watched the children play. "Found yourself a fine woman and a good place." "Thanks to you," Gideon acknowledged. Gregory shook his head. "No, this was all your doing. You recognized what was important. Took me losing your mother to learn that lesson." Later that night, as they lay in their bed, Violet nestled against Gideon's chest. "Your family is wonderful," she murmured. "The boys adore your father." "He adores them too," Gideon replied, said they remind him of me at that age. Violet smiled in the darkness. "Tommy especially. He copies everything you do." "Speaking of family," Gideon said, his hand moving to rest on her stomach. "When do you want to tell everyone our news?" Violet's hand joined his over the slight swell of her belly. "Tomorrow. It will be our Christmas gift to them." The announcement the next day was met with joy. The boys were excited at the prospect of a new sibling, and Gregory was overjoyed at the thought of another grandchild. "Best Christmas ever," Tommy declared as they sat around the festive table. Violet caught Gideon's eye across the room, her heart full to bursting. From the lonely, desperate young woman she'd been just months ago to this, surrounded by family, secure in their home with a baby on the way, it seemed impossible that so much could change in so little time. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch. The cattle Gideon had brought produced healthy calves. The expanded garden flourished, and Violet's belly grew round with their child. They added 2 rooms to the cabin, making space for their growing family. One warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Violet felt the first sharp pain. By midnight, after hours of labor with the midwife from town attending, she gave birth to a daughter. "She's perfect," Gideon whispered, cradling the tiny bundle. Tears shone in his eyes as he placed their daughter in Violet's arms. Just like her mother. They named her Grace after Gideon's mother. The boys were enchanted with their tiny sister, taking turns holding her under Violet's watchful eye. "Is this what having a real family feels like?" Samuel asked one evening as they all sat together in the parlor, Violet nursing Grace while Gideon helped the boys with their schoolwork. "This is exactly what having a real family feels like," Gideon answered, ruffling Samuel's hair. As summer bloomed across the land, the Hayes Ranch prospered. Gideon's knowledge of cattle breeding proved valuable, and Violet's preserves became sought after in town. They hired 2 hands to help with the expanding herd, and Violet took on a young girl from town to help with housework and the baby. One anniversary of the day Gideon had first arrived at their door, he and Violet sat on the porch after the children were asleep. The night was warm, crickets singing in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" Violet asked softly. "Stopping here that day, taking on a ready-made family instead of starting fresh somewhere else?" Gideon turned to her, his expression serious. "Not for a single moment. The day I rode up to this homestead was the luckiest day of my life. Even with all the work, the responsibility, especially with those things." Gideon replied, "Before you, I was just existing, moving from place to place, never connecting, never building anything lasting." He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You and the boys gave me purpose. She's our promise for the future." Violet leaned against him, savoring the solid warmth of his body. "When I said okay to your offer of help, I never imagined where it would lead." "I did," Gideon admitted with a smile. "Maybe not the details, but I knew from that first day that you were special, that this place could be home." As the years passed, the Hayes family grew and prospered. Violet gave birth to twin boys 2 years after Grace, and the ranch expanded to include more land, more cattle, and even a small apple orchard that became Violet's special project. The Parker boys grew into fine young men under Gideon's guidance. Samuel eventually went to college in Denver, returning with a degree in veterinary medicine that proved invaluable to their ranching operation. Levy discovered a talent for business, helping to expand their cattle trading network throughout the territory. Tommy, always the most like Gideon, became his father's right hand in running the day-to-day operations of the ranch. 20 years after Gideon first rode up to their door, the Hayes Ranch was one of the most successful in the territory. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper ranch house, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides and comfortable rooms for their large family. On a golden autumn evening, much like the one when they'd first met, Gideon found Violet in the orchard, gathering the last of the season's apples. "There you are," he said, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. Though time had added silver to his hair and lines around his eyes, he was still the handsome cowboy who had stolen her heart. "Just finishing up before the frost comes," Violet replied, leaning back against him. At 39, she remained beautiful, her face showing the character of a life well lived. Samuel's telegram arrived. Gideon said, "He and Margaret will be here next week with the grandchildren." Violet smiled. Their eldest son had married a doctor's daughter from Denver, giving them their first grandchildren, twin girls who were the spitting image of their grandmother. "The house will be full again," she said contentedly, "all our children under one roof. Remember when it was just you and the boys in that tiny cabin?" Gideon asked, his voice soft with memory. "And you sleeping in the barn?" Violet laughed. "We've come a long way." Gideon turned her in his arms, his eyes serious despite his smile. "Do you know what today is?" Violet nodded. 20 years since you rode up and asked if you could help." "Best question I ever asked," Gideon murmured, drawing her close. "Best answer I ever gave," Violet replied before his lips met hers in a kiss that held all the warmth and love of their years together. As they walked hand in hand back to the house, the setting sun bathing the ranch in golden light, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate young woman struggling to raise her brothers alone to the matriarch of a thriving family, from a drifting cowboy to a respected rancher and father, they had built something remarkable together. And here, we reached the end of our story. If you love what we bring, why don't you press that like button and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin for more content? All because he had asked, "What if I help?" And she had found the courage to say, "Okay." That simple exchange had changed everything, creating a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone, and the children they had raised and the land they had nurtured. The story of Violet and Gideon Hayes would be told for generations, a testament to the power of taking chances, of opening one's heart, and of finding home in the most unexpected places. And as the stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, Violet knew with absolute certainty that saying okay to Gideon Hayes had been the wisest decision of her life, the beginning of an adventure that had brought her more joy, more love, and more fulfillment than she could have ever imagined on that dusty afternoon when a tall cowboy with kind eyes had knocked on her door and offered to help. Well, that's our story for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, if you did, give us a like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. We'll see you next time with another tale from the Old West.